I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual now. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
Okay, and hello everyone. Good to hear you. And Alex, thanks for your presentation. And Bill, I know he's probably not listening any longer, but I just want to pass on my love and affection for Bill and my sentiments about his father. I understand, having gone through that with both my father and my mother most recently a year ago. And it has brought to light many keen observations and experiences about death and our existence and how we face that. And interestingly enough, Bill is discussing his arrhythmia. I've shared that with you guys too. I have the same thing. In fact, I'm in one of the arrhythmias now. And it's not pleasant, but it has certainly been a wonderful, wonderful teacher for me in a variety of different ways. And among which is what Bill has mentioned, which is that I can no longer exert the aggressive yang-based energy that I had embraced so fervently as a young man. And so it's created balance in my life out of necessity. So the Tao creates balance. I found it particularly interesting, Alex's choice, which was the Tao of peace, and now I provide the yang to his yin, which is the Tao of conflict, which are just two sides of the same coin, but ultimately how to deal with and resolve conflict is my intent, not how to perpetuate and increase conflict, because it's certainly not pleasant. And I brought this topic up because it's been something I've been experiencing. Been experiencing a substantial amount of conflict in my business, in my with my wife. And it's just something that has been prevalent in my life experience recently. So I wanted to explore that a little bit because it does seem to go in cycles. It is not something that's characteristic of my experience regularly, but it definitely comes up. It's and I don't think that we ever necessarily completely avoid it. I think it's just a way in which we can experience conflict and potentially resolve it that determines our level of skill when it comes to maintaining the path of moderation. So let's look at conflict. I like to start these things with definitions. So we look at it in the form of a verb, to come into collision or disagreement, to be contradictory, at variance, in opposition, clash, to fight or contend, to do battle. And as a noun, a fight, a battle, a struggle, especially a prolonged struggle, strife, controversy, quarrel, conflicts between parties, discord of action, feeling or effect, antagonism or opposition, as of interest or principles, a conflict of ideas, a striking together, a collision, an incompatibility or interference as one idea, desire, event, or activity with another, a conflict in the schedule, and in psychiatry, a mental struggle arising from opposing demands or impulses. So here's the fight. It's on. I like these examples from nature, the cute kittens getting ready to battle it out and the kangaroos doing the double front jump kick right there. I thought that was pretty awesome, and how they balance on their tails. The thing that I'd like to bring up about this is how stimulating conflict actually is. Why is that? Because I've observed within myself, there can be extended periods of placidness in my life where I have observed within myself the desire to spice things up, as it were. And so I start looking for conflict. I start looking for the opportunity for a fight. I used to really like to fight, and physically. And there's an adrenal surge and a dopamine release that comes from fighting, that comes from this conflict. And I know a number of people who thrive on that. It's an energy that we gather energy from, that we pull it in. In fact, there was a book that I'm trying to think of the name of, and we listened to the gentleman speak. My wife just walked in. Joanne.
Hello.
Hello. What was the gentleman who we saw at the Conscious Parenting, Neil Donald Walsh? What was the book that he wrote?
Oh my gosh, it had something to do with God.
Conversations with God. I think that's his name. And in that book, he talks about how there's a workbook that has accompanied it, and he talks about how people will draw energy from conflict, and that they will find a way to draw energy from others by creating this conflict. It's a way for them to be basically energy leeches. And I've certainly found myself guilty of that, of being an energy leech. I will start conflicts when I feel I need to gather energy from something. So there's a reward to this. There's a payoff. We've got a prominent political figure right now who is a perfect example of this, who breeds conflict and thrives on the energy of the conflict. And what I would question is this something that's beneficial and or healthy? I think conflict is natural, but the exacerbation of conflict and then the indulgence in conflict for the sake of building that energy, I would argue, is counterproductive and in fact destructive. So that comes down to this. Why do we enjoy the battle? Because it's fun. I mean, sometimes it's fun. You have to admit that it is. Now, Derek and I both know a lot of people who love to argue, and as Bill pointed out, boy, those hot buttons, politics and religion, those are certainly ways to do that. I remember sitting at Derek, I can't recall exactly where it was. We were at a dinner. I can't recall. Gosh, I can't remember what it was for, but I remember there was a gentleman sitting there quite some time ago when we began to discuss Tao-related topics, and I don't even really remember the source of the argument, but it was something about Jesus and something about religion, and he was very contentious about whatever point it was he was making, and I thought of what a good example that was of how these topics can really raise the hackles on everyone's back, and then we kind of jump in, and then a lot of folks that I know, including myself at times, will create this battle where there really isn't necessity of having a battle, just to stir up the pot. One of the things that we look at is survival. What does this do? So when we have conflict, it kicks us into fight or flight mode. Our brain surges, we produce chemicals that will move us forward into either fighting or flighting. Yeah, that's a verb. So or running away. And so if you look at my zombie apocalypse slide here, we can see how that can certainly be beneficial when we're in the midst of conflict that we can't avoid. So as we talk about this a lot in self-defense, sometimes you just get picked. We can live as harmonious and peaceful a life as we would like, and very often our awareness will allow us to avoid, to skirt conflict, but sometimes we just end up in it. It's how it is. I used to go looking for it. I no longer do that. I haven't had a physical confrontation with anybody for, I don't know, probably 10 years or maybe 15 years even. And I know that I used to have one very frequently because I would go looking for it. Now the only time I find myself in conflict is when, and I'm even pretty good at not initiating conflict, vast majority of the time, but I find myself in the midst of it sometimes. My mechanism, my default, is to be just like the guy in the center. Seek and destroy. Kill all zombies. So I definitely go into the defensive mode. And to me, it threatens my survival, so my mechanism is fight. Been trained to do that since I was a kid, so my mental reflex is to fight, not to de-escalate. Now, that's something I've been working on for quite some time with varying degrees of success. And most of the time, though, what I aspire to is to resolve conflict in a way that leads to an amicable outcome for everyone involved, not to just crush the source of the conflict. So if we take a look, this is an example of one of the Buddhist views of conflict resolution. This is a quote from a PhD who observed these types of circumstances. Dr. Singhi says, conflict often emanates from attachment to material things, pleasures, property, territory, wealth, economic dominance, or political superiority. Furthermore, the Buddha says that sense pleasures lead to desire for greater sense pleasures, which leads on to conflict between all kinds of people. The poet Santideva points out whenever conflict arises among living creatures, the sense of possession is the cause. Well, my personal experience has been that yes, sense pleasures and infatuation with sense pleasures lead to an insatiable desire to continue down that path. It's not that they're evil or bad, it's just that when it leads to the point of self-obsession, that we constantly want to experience this, when that's somehow threatened, that this can lead to substantial conflict. So in the Buddhist context, being able to disassociate from that sense pleasure, living the life of moderation, not necessarily an ascetic who eliminates all all but the essentials from life, but again, living within moderation to where we don't become afflicted in this samsaric cycle of obsession with the sense pleasures. I found an interesting excerpt, a lady named Marguerite Diopoli, I think Theraphyl, I'm not really sure even how to pronounce her name, but I like what she said about this in speaking of the Tao. And I'll just read what I found from her. Since Tao suggests an understanding of alternatives, it is also a potent approach to handling conflict. Conflict is understood as that which arises from imbalance of yin-yang and can be resolved by working to rebalance whatever is disproportionate. Thus, conflict handling is seen significantly not as the go in and sort it out now approach, but rather as a cyclic, ongoing, awareness-worthy process. The Taoist approach would be that nothing can stay the same always. Conflict arises in response to the disharmony that any one-sided approach is bound to bring in time. Even efforts to rigorously maintain a conflict-free relationship, society, or world. As a key expression of Taoist thought, Wu Wei, the non-action talked of in various Taoist texts, does not imply passiveness or acquiescence. In very raw translation, Wu Wei is to do without doing or to act without action. We tend to forget that non-action does not evoke no action, but a different kind of action. Wu Wei implies that individuals' part may be at times to be to take action, while at others, one's part very often is to simply be still, so that the way may act through one without hindrance. There are very few people who explain Wu Wei in that way. And I find that Derek is one of them also. I thought this was a very useful observation, or series of observations, with respect to a number of things that we've talked about. So we go back to Alex's talk, where we talk about the conflict arising in the South, but that is an example of war. And the example that Bill pointed out of change being an integral part of life. There's no way that we can not have it. And recognizing this constant shifting of balance that is pliable, mobile, always shifting and changing, that it's never exactly the same in this stasis, then this suggests that we are constantly adjusting. And the degree to which we can adjust is an indication of our mental and physical acuity when it comes to maintaining a balanced life. I've observed within myself that when I'm directly confronted with conflict, I'm not very good at observing and being thoughtful in my response. My immediate response is to contradict and fight back, which is an example of Wu Wei, not sometimes the optimal response. Sometimes to just give way is the optimal response because it creates greater harmony. And then through example, I can assert my point at a later time, if that's even necessary. So I think these are all worthy of consideration and are something that are an enormous part of our life. And we clearly have to put at the forefront of our minds maintaining balance and finding harmony and adhering to a statute of non-harm for all sentient beings. That's one of my greatest loves of the Tao, is that it's a recognition of what is, that this all stems from the same source. It's finding that balance and recognizing how to fit in ourselves with our energy and the energy of the Tao. And that is most certainly an art. It's a science as well, but it is most definitely an art when it comes to our ability to create a shift within ourselves, despite the fact that it may not feel as though it's the most natural thing to do. So that was my presentation today, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Ed, thank you very much. Ed, I actually remember that dinner that you were referencing in the beginning of your presentation. I think it's got to be 4 or 5 years ago. It was a banquet here at the temple, and it's been quite some time. So that's why I think both you and I have only a vague recollection of it. You're right. There was a gentleman who was very confrontational. I actually don't remember what he said or who he was. I just, they say that emotions, a lot of times emotions is what you still retain after you forget everything else. So I remember how uncomfortable he made everyone feel when he was that confrontational. I was actually sitting next to you, Ed, and I remember feeling amusement because that gentleman did not know that you, for instance, have many years of experience engaging in that sort of debates, but you had chosen to not do it that day at that time. So he had no idea, who the people were that he was talking to.
I remember it, and I remember you dealt with it very artfully. So I was in appreciation of that. I felt I had nothing to add, so I stayed silent.
Exactly. And also, speaking of zombie apocalypse, so I know there's a lot of people out there listening to this and also listening to the recording on YouTube. A lot of people are looking forward to the premiere of the next season of The Walking Dead.
Absolutely.
Am I all right? So, everybody wants to know what's going to happen. Who will be the victim of Lucille? And if you don't know what that means, it's okay. Never mind. Now,
Yeah, I'm a total zombie nerd, I have to admit, so there you go.
so in the Tao, we like simple solutions. Simple solutions are effective and elegant. So let me pose a question to everyone and then answer it. What would be a Tao solution to the zombie apocalypse? A simple and elegant solution to the zombie apocalypse. Let me give everyone a few minutes to think about that and then give you my answer, my take on it, my suggestion.
That sounds great. Thanks, Derek.
So guys, if we happen to live in the world where the zombie apocalypse is an actual possibility, then what we would do is to bury the dead with the shoelaces tied together from both feet.
I like it. That's awesome.
Problem solved.
That's the best one I've heard, Derek. That's fantastic.
And also on the subject of conflict, we're gonna take a mid-meeting break in just a moment because we've been having this meeting for a little over an hour now. But let me share one more thing with everyone. I just read this recently, supposedly from the Dalai Lama, but it may be one of those misattributions. But I think it's very relevant to the topic of your presentation, Ed. And the quote is that we human beings are built for loving people and using material things. We end up loving material things and using people. That's how we get conflicts. That's why the world gets so messed up. Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规则是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.
Participate in the Tao meeting by joining us online. For information, go to Taoism.net/Tao